Gather, veterans. It's time to join the fight. The long war begins.
This is a special edition of the Long War Podcast. This is Kenny Boucher, joined tonight by the legendary Mike Haspil, the now published author of Graveyard Shift. What's up, my man?
Hey, what's going on, everyone?
We have a pretty fun little episode for you tonight. We're going to do a quick candid Q&A with the legend himself. And then I think we're going to follow it up, if you guys hang in there with us, with a reading from the novel. And I think we have a special note from the author right now.
Yeah, so there is only one reference to Warhammer 40K in this book. And I'm going to tell you guys what it is right now. The leader, the figurehead of the Lightbearer Society in the book is called Lilith. And it's spelled the Dark Eldar way, Lelith. And that is like my little shout out to the 40K fans and everything. And that's really it. So if you're not into like hearing about the book or whatever, you can tune out now.
Which is not going to take away from our regularly scheduled podcast this Wednesday or whatever day of the week this is. So
yeah, we're recording this like a week out from when the book's going to drop. And see, now that all the non-book people have have dropped out, now we can talk about the most broken list in 8th edition.
Yep. We're actually going to talk about Dark Shroud spam, Azrael lists, and et cetera, et cetera.
No, for real, we're not.
We're not.
So you can turn it off if you don't want to hear about the book, because it's like going to be about writing.
And so this is I feel honestly, personally honored to be a part of this with you, Haspil, and to even give a Q&A, be on the interviewer side of a Q&A. I've been with you since the beginning. Been a fan of this book since day one. I still have my OG Photoshop covered, Kinko copied edition of the book here in my Beats Lab.
Yeah, that's a long time ago. And hopefully that'll be worth something, and you can auction it on eBay. Because I have a copy too. I'm like, oh, that's going to pay for an army someday.
That's why I hold on to it. There's no other reason. It's terrible. Psych.
It is actually not very good. He's not joking. That first edition of the book, I was super proud, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna let everyone read it, and it's garbage, hot garbage. But I've done like 24 drafts since then. And
that's kind of the secret, right? Is the first draft is, I mean, you told me a funny story. Let's do this anecdote before we start.
Sure thing.
Was it the Green Mile from Stephen King? Is that where the story began, where you threw it across the room?
Yeah. I opened up the Green Mile, and this is like the original when it first came out, and it was serialized. So you had to wait like 2 weeks in between each part of the book coming out. And I opened it, and I think it was like the very first sentence or the first paragraph or something was just perfect. And I threw the book across the room. I was just pissed. I was like, oh.
I will never be that good at writing.
But the trick is that you're comparing. The way I've heard it put is that you're comparing your like first round demo mixtape against someone's like top 100 hit. So you just can't, you're like, hey, I just started to learn how to play guitar and I can play Mary Had a Little Lamb. And then you're listening to like Led Zeppelin and you're like, oh,
check out my riff of Deep Purple.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, hey, I can play Smoke on the Water. And then it's like, oh, Stairway.
Yeah.
Metallica, Master of Puppets. Oh,
I should just quit. So, like I said, I'm honored to be on the interviewer side of this, and I have selected some questions that I find very interesting as a consumer of many novels per year. Obviously, I use Audible, which is also one of the services that you can get Graveyard Shift from, and I even believe this is fact. Actually, I already knew. I made it seem like this was news to me. You can actually sign up on Audible, get your free 30-day trial, and spend your free credit on Graveyard Shift, which would also support Mike Haspil. That's something I urge everyone to do, because Audible is also one of the greatest tools that I have discovered in the hobby.
Yeah, it is fantastic to paint and listen to some great books and everything. They have a ton of books on there. If you've ever found yourself like kind of, oh, hey, I always meant to read this book. For me, it's Foundation. And you'd never get around to it.
6 years, dog.
Yeah. Start a new army and then go, you know what? I'm going to listen to Foundation. And then you'll get, it's awesome.
It's awesome. It's literally the best. And so without further ado, let's jump right into it. What are common traps for aspiring writers?
All right, I'll probably cover the two big ones. First, your writing's not as good as you think it is. So the first trap is thinking your first draft is good enough. And I fell wholeheartedly into that trap. I've been writing most of my life. Like, I was the chief editor of my literary magazine when I was in high school, co-editor actually, but I'd done all kinds of stuff. I wrote screenplays in the 90s. So I thought, man, I got this writing gig down. And like you heard us talking, like the first draft of Graveyard Shift, I would not show that to anyone today, like, period. Like, no, not at all. It was a NaNoWriMo book, and it is absolutely terrible. So don't trust your own writing. Have somebody else read it, and it shouldn't be your mom or your best friend or family members, because they'll just tell you what you want to hear. You need somebody who, unadulterated, can look at your stuff and tell you, hey, this was boring, I put it down here, or I had a really hard time making it through this passage or whatever. And when I do like a beta read or something like that, I actually send out a checklist to people and say, if you stopped reading, where did you stop reading? When did you put the book down? Can you tell me where on the page you stopped and put the book down and walked away? Because the idea behind it, and this is like a little tricky secret, is if somebody reads a book in one sitting or stayed up all night to read a book, they're never going to tell you it was bad. It's always the best book they've ever read. So that's what you're aiming for. The second thing I would say is the big trap is when you're looking for an agent or an editor, anybody who charges like a reading fee, you can't go with that. You have to, that's a scam. The guy's going to, hey, I charge $200 to read and then I'll represent you. No, he's just taking your $200. That's all that's happening right there. It's a scam.
Yeah. His business model is receiving $200 PayPal transactions and moving on.
And guaranteed, like, your stuff's going into, well, it's not even going into the circular file anymore, because they'll just delete it. It's just gone. So just look out for that.
Solid advice. What literary pilgrimages have you gone on?
Okay, again, I'm stuck on the number 2, but the two big ones I went on is when I went to the UK. Not on this last time, but before, I went to the Eagle and Child pub in Oxford. And for those of you who don't know, that is where J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis used to hang out after classes and everything. And that is kind of just a cool literary pilgrimage. There's really nothing. It's a pub, there's not any crazy stuff like that. While on that same trip, and so I guess I'll break the mold and go to 3. On that same trip, I did go to 221B Baker Street because I had to. And it's not a house. Go figure. I think it was a bank when I went there. So I was a bit disappointed. And then the other literary pilgrimage that I go on, and we tend to go every year because it's right here in Colorado, is the Stanley Hotel at Estes Park. And that is where Stephen King got snowed in and wrote The Shining. And that is the Overlook Hotel. They even filmed the TV version of The Shining there. So it's actually really cool because they make it look like it's out in the middle of nowhere with nothing surrounding it. It's kind of in the middle of town. You can just walk off and like 200 yards away is
like, if you had some snowshoes, you could have just walked to someone's house.
You could have just walked to safety. Like, hey, can I use your phone? Like, we're stuck up in the hotel.
Walk up to Safeway and grab some groceries.
Yeah, it's totally okay.
Oh, that's funny. Now here's one that's a big question for me as a huge fan of many authors. Does a big ego help or hurt writers?
I think a little bit of both. I don't remember who said this, but somebody said that, and they weren't talking about just artists or writers. They were talking about artists in general, but they said that artists were narcissists with crippling self-doubt. And that is exactly what it is. So you have to be arrogant to a certain level, but you can't be obnoxious about it. I mean, some guys can get away with being obnoxious about it, but most of the time that's not going to win you any fans. But you have to be arrogant enough to believe that the rules do not apply to you and that if you can make it. Because let me give you some raw numbers, and this is the insanity that you're dealing with. My agent last year took 30,000 queries. That's emails that came in that said, hey, will you represent my book? 30,000 of them. She took 4 clients. Those are the numbers you're dealing with. And if you're a publisher, there's only 5 big publishers left. There's still small press. There's indie publishing, of course, but of the big ones, there's only 5. So try to think of how many people are submitting books, and the numbers start to become really depressing. So you have to be arrogant enough to just go, you know what? That's great. That they're talking about other people, not me. Like, I'm better than that, and I'm going to make it all the way through. And granted, there's some caveats, like when out of those 30,000 queries that she gets, probably I would say 25,000 of them are either formatted improperly or have spelling mistakes in them, or spelled her name wrong, or aren't even addressed to her. They just say, "Dear agent." That's an instant rejection. So because they have so many emails coming in, I think she can dedicate only maybe 11 seconds to each one. Otherwise, all she's doing is checking email. That's it. So she just scans it, and if there's like "Dear agent," gone. You know what I mean? Oh, misspelling in the first sentence, gone. It's pretty brutal.
Yeah, you're gonna have to come. I mean, damn. That also you can also file that under common traps for aspiring writers. Personalize your emails and don't spell people's names wrong.
Yeah, definitely check your agent's website that you're going to query, because they probably have guidelines and pet peeves, and make sure that they represent the genre that you're writing in. You know, if I was going to send, like, Sarah Megabo is my agent, she represents sci-fi fantasy. If I sent her, and she also does romance, but if I sent her historical fiction, she doesn't represent that. So I'm probably going to get rejected. That doesn't mean that my book was bad. It's just she doesn't represent that.
Here's a question near and dear to the roots of our podcast. What is your writing kryptonite?
Oh, yeah. So everyone who listens to the podcast will probably know my writing kryptonite is a little game called Warhammer 40K. And it would work out really well, Black Library, in case you're listening, if I could write Black Library, because then all the painting and gaming I did, that's just research. I could write it all.
R&D.
R&D. I'm actually working right now as I'm painting this stuff, because I'm writing a book about blood ravens. I don't know. I could somehow
even the podcast would be.
I could somehow justify it, but honestly, it's like, yeah, you do need to recharge your creative batteries. But gaming, in general, and particularly 40K, has there's times where I should have been writing, definitely. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to finish the squad instead. And you just got to have the discipline to go, no, this is my writing time.
Well, being that you are writing, that's a business too. I mean, that's your self-employment right now. I mean, you don't work for anybody. You have leveraged contracts and deals with publishers, but you absolutely, your writing schedule, the way you produce your content, there is a degree of discipline that comes along with self-employment.
Yeah. And if you don't treat it like a job, I know some people that have gotten lucky and they don't treat it like a job and they succeed. But most people, if you do not treat it like a job, you will not succeed. Like, you need to set up a schedule, and no matter what, your writing time's your writing time. Just like if you were going to work, you can't just skip out on work every day just because you're like, well, I got to finish the squad. You know what I mean? Or I want to play Sniper.
Do as I say, don't do as I do.
Well, I've gotten better at it. I've gotten better.
No, I mean, you're right. The artists got to recharge their batteries, but I think a big part of artwork, no matter what medium you're in, is absolutely commercial art. You can be a commercial artist without compromising your art.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
A lot of that falls into professionalism. Like, so I completely was hoping you'd have an answer like that.
Yeah. Because it's like, you can't, you can't just I'm trying to think of a good way to put it, but it can't be a hobby. If it's a hobby, that's what you're going to be, a hobbyist. And you'll hear people going, oh, if I treat it this hard or whatever, then I'm compromising my art. I'm like, well, you'll you won't be successful. You can get lucky, but people win the lottery every day.
Yeah, there's no shame in monetizing your passions.
Yeah, not at all.
Did you ever consider writing under a pseudonym?
I have, and I'm actually still thinking about it because it depends on how Graveyard Shift is received. Graveyard Shift is kind of a hard R. It is really hardcore, and I have a really good idea for STEM, science, technology, engineering, math based YA book. And depending if Graveyard Shift is like received well, and I become known as like, as, hey, this is the guy who wrote this like kind of hard R book, people may not be receptive to buying a YA book by the same author. So it's kind of like Stephen King is known for horror, even though he writes fantasy. So it's just kind of interesting when you watch like certain trailers, like for the Shawshank Redemption, they won't say that it was by Stephen King. They'll say from the writer of from the writer of Stand By Me, or from the writer of the Shawshank Redemption. But if it's like horror or fantasy, they get right into it.
They say from the mind of Stephen King.
Yeah, from Stephen King, because that's his brand. So if I'm building a brand to go, hey, this guy writes like hardcore action scenes with lots of, gore and violence, and they're hard hitting and it's fun, but it's, it's kind of brutal. It's like, you don't say, hey, from the mind of Quentin Tarantino comes, The Notebook,
the film adaptation of the anime Avatar.
Yeah, people would not go to see that. They would just be like, what? So you kind of have to, and that's when I thought about writing under a pseudonym. But I haven't written that book yet. It's just an idea.
What would your pseudonym be?
Inspector Mac, probably.
Solid name, sir. Oh, I love it. I think you may have sort of
either that, or I actually joked about this. You call yourself like George R.R. Martin, but spell it like Jorge.
That would be so good. It's like the porno.
It's like those asylum movies like Titanic 2, where you're just hoping like somebody just, hey, look at this. You call it like The Winds of Winter, but spell everything with a Y.
Yep.
And, I'd get sued so quickly.
So fast, so hard. Do you ever... Okay, now, like I said, you may have sort of answered this one, but do you try more to be original or to deliver to the readers what they want? Which is a priority there?
Oh, that is a really good question. I really, really try to be original. But that comes with a caveat. Obviously, Graveyard Shift is urban fantasy. It's kind of a noir. It's a police procedural. So writing within those, there's expectations of genre that you have to meet. And when you break those expectations of genre, that's when people get upset, because they're just like, hey, I bought a book called Graveyard Shift that has police procedural, and this is really a romance. It's a period romance. People will get very, very upset. But if you go, hey, this is a book from the cover, I can tell it's about cops. There's like Egyptian stuff on it. There's, on the back, we're talking about vampires. This is very clearly urban fantasy. And if it doesn't have those elements in there, the reader's going to get upset, because that's what they bought. It's writing is one of those few endeavors where, and it's changing a little bit, but you have to buy my book kind of sight unseen on a promise that I'm going to tell you a good story. And films are kind of that way too, but you at least get to see a trailer and go, oh, that looks cool, or that scene looked awesome, I want to see how that happened. And with books, you don't really get that. So you get the cover and maybe like the back cover copy. And based on that, you have to trust me that I'm telling you a good story. So if I violate that trust, I lose readers. But at the same time, I try to be original, because if you're halfway through my thing and you go, man, I know exactly where this is going because I've read this before, or I've seen this before, or all he did was take this story and file the serial numbers.
So you have to try to give the reader what they want within the genre while being as original with your piece as possible. Yeah,
that is a much not long-winded way of saying what I just said.
It's easier. You said it, and then I just summarized it. You did the work for me. I guess I could be your editor.
Yeah, definitely.
It would be bad. Don't do that. There's a lot of periods in this, and a lot of all caps and a lot of exclamation points. Kenny, are you sure about this? Oh yeah, I'm an editor. Trust me.
That's legit. You get to use probably like 100 exclamation points.
Yep.
Like every sentence should end with like 3 or 4 exclamation points.
Oh yeah. Do you want each book to stand on its own, or are you trying to build a body of work with connections between each book?
Yes and yes. So, so each book that I have 6 books planned for what I call the Minkara saga, which is, and Graveyard Shift is actually kind of right in the smack in the middle of the saga. So it's kind of like an episode 4 situation. But all the other books like either take place obviously before or after, and one of them is almost simultaneous, like it overlaps with events that happened. But I want them to all stand alone. But at the same time, it's kind of like a good analogy would be how the Marvel has the standalone movies. You know, like Captain America: Winter Soldier stands alone. You don't have to have seen all the other movies, but it definitely helps if you know who Iron Man is. And if you know what happened with, the Avengers, it definitely helps you to enjoy the story more, but you don't have to. You could just watch it by itself and it stands alone. And it's just part of the whole Captain America story. So that's kind of what I'm aiming for, where things are completely standalone, but there's definitely some references here and there that won't take, it shouldn't take you out of the story. You'll just be like, oh, well, he's referencing something that happened before, obviously. But if you read that other story, it'll tie in and you'll go, oh, okay, this is what he's referencing.
As a reader, that gives me feel goodsies whenever that happens in books. Makes me feel smart to pick up on those things. And so I feel like that's like good foreshadowing kind of does that too, right? Good foreshadowing. You figure it out right before it happens and you feel like a genius as a reader and you're like, I'm the smartest motherfucker on the world. and I always revel at that, the ability of a writer to do something like that. It makes me happy to hear, because you know what? I don't buy books that don't have whole worlds attached to them anymore. I want to be invested.
Well, that's a big trend in fantasy. Obviously, folks want to buy a series. They want to know they're investing into something bigger.
And I don't care how long it takes. I'll wait. Just because there's lots of great content out there, but I want to know that this is not the last I've heard of Makari. That's. Oh yeah. That makes me happy to hear. How many unpublished and half-finished books do you have?
Right now I have 4, and 2 of them are in this series, and so I'm working on those. One of them is the next book that I'll be sending out hopefully in September to editors to try to get that out, and that's called The Scrying Stone of the Nightmare King, and that is a love letter to all geek and nerd culture. Literally, there is a scene that takes place at Denver Comic-Con, and I had at this last Comic-Con, I actually wrote that chapter at Denver Comic-Con. It was like this crazy meta. I was like, I kind of have to do this. And then I have another one called Good News Week, which was, unfortunately, I came up with this and it was like really cool. And then The Walking Dead, hit. And I was like, yeah, zombies are oversaturated right now, so I can't do that story. And I had another one about Project Monarch, but now with all the I guess they don't call it multiple personality disorder anymore. It's called something else. But, we've got the M. Night Shyamalan film just came out, and there's a couple other things, and like Orphan Black kind of ties into that a little bit.
Oh yeah, multiple personality stuff, whatever the genre is called, that is big right now.
So that's huge. So I've just shelved that project, and I'll come back to it later. Because as a rule, this is another good trap for aspiring writers. Don't chase what's hot, because you're already too late. It takes on average 18 to 24 months for a book, once it gets to the publisher, to hit the bookshelves. So that means that your average book that you see on the bookshelf was written 3 years ago. So if you see a trend that's really hot, like, oh, hey, this is really hot. Like I don't know, I'm just making this up, but they're like, hey, if, books about mermaids are super hot right now, so if you try to write a mermaid book, by the time that would get to an editor, it's already burned out. It's already done. So don't try to chase the trends. Just write what you want. And you may have to wait a while, I wanted to write a vampire book, and that was like right before True Blood came on the air.
That was a hilarious story. When I was reading your book, I was like, are you aware of True Blood? And you're like, I don't even want to hear that right now.
Yeah, it's just like, no.
But they're nothing alike, guys. They're not. So it couldn't be, if you write a book that has vampires in it, of course, all vampire movies have some similar things, right? All vampire stories do, but this is not that story.
No, it is not.
This is not that story.
Unless you're a fan of Charlaine Harris, in which case it totally is exactly that story.
Yes.
No, I'm lying. Don't buy it thinking it's going to be like Charlaine Harris, because it's not.
It is not. This is one that's fun. How do you select names for your characters?
That is kind of interesting. The ones in Graveyard Shift were kind of easy because I wanted them to, they were almost stereotypes. With Alex, it's a little bit different because I had a whole backstory for him, and his name is actually Alejandro. And that's why people call him Alex, but he is Menkara. And I always wanted to write a story about ancient Egypt and the Pharaoh Menkara, because people don't know who he is, and he should be really famous. There's 3 pyramids at Giza, the pyramid of Khafra, Khufu, and Menkara. And people just forget who he is. Even if you use the Greek names of, Cheops, Kephren, and Mykarinos, no one remembers the last guy. And he actually has some really cool stuff in there that you're like, when I was reading his history, I was like, wow, I can twist this just a little bit and it just writes itself. It's so cool.
Which comes from your historical backgrounds, that you crack out on in real life.
Yeah. So, and then Marcus was just a stereotype. Well, I need a Roman guy, Marcus. Super easy. And then I have the police lieutenant that's in charge of the Nocturne section. Her name's Constance. And I just wanted it to harken back. When you hear somebody called Constance, you immediately harken back to kind of like the Puritan era, and she's like one of the survivors of the Roanoke colony. So that's where she came from. Giorgi was I wanted an Italian name, but something that people had not run into. So it was just that. And then Runa was actually suggested to me by a friend of mine, who has a crush on somebody named Rune. I don't really remember, but I was like, Runa is a really cool name. And I just try to grab names like that. In Scrying Stone, there's a lot of people. I won't say they're based on people, but there's a lot of people that I just was like, oh, that's totally their name. Like I just took people I knew and changed the name like a little bit, so it wasn't just exactly them.
That's fun insight, because there's a lot of great names. Because I feel like, because everyone knows, Bonet's a writer, and she writes film, doesn't write novels, but that's a thing she's always working on is names. She's like, does this name sound right? Does this sound right? And I'm like,
yeah.
Don't ask me. I don't know.
And you have to have consideration too. Like if it's an action story, and Menkara is not a name that you can yell in an action scene. It takes too long. So you need to shorten it down to 1 or 2 syllables, hence Alex, because you can yell, Alex, look out. But Menkara, look, oh, he's shot.
Damn, that's funny. I never even thought of that. I always just tell her, no mics.
Yeah, Mike is way too common.
That's what I always tell her. Don't do that one. Here's one that's...
Oh, wait, going back. This is another trap people fall into. Don't have characters with the same first letter as a name. So you can have, Alex and Marcus, but don't have Mike and Marcus, because that'll
no
mess
alliteration and bromance.
Yeah, exactly. So you just want to change it. And if you're writing screenplays, the main reason you want to do that in a screenplay is so that when you hit the first letter of a person's name, the software, whether you're using Word or Scrivener or Movie Magic Screenwriter and the other one, Final Draft, when you hit that, when you go down to dialogue and you hit the first letter of the name, it will populate the name for you. And if you have multiple characters with the same first letter, now you have to scroll down and it just takes you out of the groove.
Wow, that's some insider shit right there. I would have never thought of that. Wow, clutch advice from the legendary Mike Haspil. Now, here's one of my favorite questions to ask you. What is your favorite childhood book?
Oh, man. Yeah, this is hard. It's probably a tie between The Hobbit and the Adventures of Robin Hood by Howard Pyle. And nowadays, the Adventures of Robin Hood, like if you see it, it's written in kind of a faux Middle English. Like it is definitely a heightened English with marys and prithees and all kinds of, thous and these. And, but it's definitely, it's a fake Middle English, but it's not an easy read. But when it came out, it was considered a children's book. And I read it in probably 5th or 6th grade. And I adored it, but I was at military school and I was weird because we had no TV. So I read like Lamort Arthur in like 7th grade.
You want to hear some funny shit? That was probably one of the first books I read was Robin Hood, the Illustrated Tales. Because I wasn't even sure I could read in 5th grade yet. I feel like I read one of the ones where it's like every page had a picture and like 6 sentences on it that were huge, like 24 fonts.
But that counts. That's cool.
Oh yeah, my old 4th grade English teacher, Miss Sharpison, recently had a connection with her on Facebook because I posted something, or my mom posted a picture of her and me together, and of course she's still friends with all my old 4th grade teachers and shit. And Miss Sharpison was like, I said something like, me not read so good, me fail English, that impossible, or something like that. And she's like, no, you read that Robin Hood book? And I was like, I am personally honored that you remember that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I read, of course, like the Green Eggs and Ham and all those kind of books. But I'm also doubly weird that like the first books I read were probably in French because that was my first language. So
French was your first language in Haiti?
Oh, I wasn't in Haiti, but French was my first language, like for a while. Like I didn't speak English till I went to school. Wow.
I didn't see, and I've been friends with you for over a decade. I mean, I know of your Haitian descent, and I know that that's a primary language they speak, but I didn't know that French was your first language.
Yeah. Yeah. So
this is awesome for me as a friend and now a fan. What is the most difficult part? This is probably the biggest question of the artistic process.
I would say the emotional toll. Like it is a bad roller coaster. And I'd hate to name drop, but John Scalzi told me this, and he's right. He was like, celebrate everything, because the whole lifestyle will just destroy you. It conspires to destroy you. You have to realize that you're putting your soul out there, your innermost thoughts, everything. And once they leave your hands, that you can no longer control it. Like how some people can get offended. Some people might think that this great scene of pathos that you wrote is the funniest thing they have ever read, and vice versa. You might have written this incredible joke that makes you just die laughing, and then somebody else reads it and bursts into tears, and it's like, that's the saddest thing I've ever read. So you don't have a whole lot of control. On top of that, there are so many gates, what I call, and I stole this from Joseph Campbell, threshold guardians. There are so many guardians out there that don't want you to complete your quest. And then sometimes they look like friends. Sometimes they look like unpainted miniatures. But
nice.
But they are out there, and I think that's why a lot of people are like, well, artists are like emotional wrecks and everything like that. And it just takes its toll. And I think that's the hardest thing. And that's why I said, like, you kind of have to be a little bit arrogant, because you have to believe that everyone out there is wrong and that you're right. You're like, I have this vision. I know I'm right. I know that this is a good story. I know people are going to love it, and I'm going to risk it all for that. And it can hurt really badly when you've risked it all and you don't make it, which happens to everybody. I don't know of any writers who've never been rejected. So it's brutal. And you just kind of have to, I have a little exercise I do. And I honestly, I don't even know where I picked this up, but it's like when something like that happens, I will, and I'm not as good about it as I want to be, but you're mindful about it. You're like, okay, that sucked. And I literally set an alarm on my phone for like a minute or 2 minutes. And I go, I will allow myself to feel this for 2 minutes. And then I rant and I rage and, just this is so unfair, and just get so pissed off. And that alarm goes off and you have to turn it off because that emotion is not useful. It's just expending energy. You're not doing anything. If you can harness that rage and it makes you paint like an entire army or something, then by all means, write angry. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, that person really did that. I'm going to write this next chapter. Do not write angry on social media.
I would say, further to that point, like obviously I'm a different type of artist, but I've always said, things like drinking and smoking and any type of drug, right? I've always said that like rage is a drug, man. Like, it's an emotion, like emotions. A lot of times we use them as drugs. And I've always been the proponent of, I can't create art under the influence of any drug, bro. Like, I don't care what anyone says. Like, that is not my personal experience. I absolutely cannot create art if I'm angry, if I'm overly excited, if I'm super sad. I can't even create art if I drink too many cups of coffee, bro. Like, think about it like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
and it's definitely powerful neurotransmitters are moving through your brain when you feel these emotions. So, and this is, it's controversial, but there's a theory out there that talks about how your brain can actually get addicted to its own neurotransmitters. So if you're like used to being angry, in fact, you get addicted, bro. You get addicted, yeah. Bro. This is a side story, but when I was in Minot, North Dakota, I used to drink a lot of Jack Daniels, and we used to just sit around and just bitch and rant and rave about how much everything sucked and just got really pissed off. Well, I accidentally conditioned my body. So I can't drink Jack Daniels now, because if I drink Jack Daniels, I will get pissed off, because I kind of conditioned my body to go, when I'm pissed off, I'm drinking Jack Daniels. So therefore the opposite is true. And if I have Jack Daniels, I could be in a really good mood. I drink Jack Daniels and that'll just trigger, I'll start getting angry about nothing.
Wow.
And it's just really weird.
Wow. That's crazy. No, I think that's some serious insight, man. Like I'm ready to go write my first novel now. I actually wrote a 10-page short story once. Can I pitch it to you?
Yeah.
All right. So it's called Crazy Dave and the Taco of Time.
I love it already.
And it is essentially about this character that I wrote that I was using almost as it was a character that because I was an aspiring comic book artist. That's always what like my goal was, right? So you have all these characters you pushing that you're like, these are the characters I know are going to be amazing. And Crazy Dave was kind of my reprieve. He was kind of my fake character that I would work on when I had my artist block, right? When I was hitting these walls trying to create these illustrative maps. And also I wanted to write my stories too, because, eventually I knew I would probably get hired by somebody and there would be somebody else who's writing, but at least I would be possibly pitching these characters. Maybe someone like Dark Horse is somebody who'd pick me up. And eventually I did actually get an opportunity from Dark Horse. That's why I said them to hit them with 3 pages.
Nice.
And then that's when I learned how far from being a comic book illustrator I was.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because they said by Friday, and I was like, "Fucking this Friday," and they were like, "Yeah, yes, this Friday, like in 4 days, 3 pages." And I was like, "That's not even a thing." They're like, "You're gonna need to be able to do 3 a day, draw 3 a day." I was like, and you're talking about a guy who's already done like his 1,000 hours a year drawing. Like I was committed to this, right? And I was still like, I'm 20 years old and I'm still like not even close. But then they were like, but we are interested in Crazy Dave. I'd like to see some of that. And I was like, really? kind of like to what you were talking about, like this shit I've been working on, like crushing my soul to try to get these drawings done and these stories and everything. And he's like, no, Crazy Dave seems interesting. Give me something on that. So I ended up writing a 10-page short story about him later when I failed my test with these guys, when I could not produce the 3 pages. I went off and was like, well, maybe there's something here. And I wrote a little 10-page short story, and it was about, he lives in an outhouse, which he converted into a house. So his house,
it's a tiny house now.
And it's actually a full big house. But it started to see, that's the thing, is like he added on the addition to the outhouse was the house.
Okay.
So the front door is an OG outhouse, like half moon door, and he added on. And he sells discount fireworks. He likes to carve in his spare time, and he went on this adventure, which all starts with this joke. Okay, have you ever heard it's like this super horrible joke where it's like, 3 people are in a car, man driving, woman in the passenger seat, guy sleep in the back. They get pulled over by a cop. Cop comes up and says, hey guys, do you know why I pulled you over today? They're super nervous. And the cop's like, well, actually it is a nationwide or statewide safety awareness campaign, and you guys are all wearing your seatbelts, so you actually are entitled to these vouchers. And they're like, what? And the driver immediately like, well, I guess I can go down to DMV and finally, pay that $75 to get my truck registered. And instantaneously the lady is like, oh my God. And the cop's like, are you serious right now? And the lady's like, do not listen to this guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He always acts this way when he's drinking. And right when you don't think it can get any worse, the guy in the back who's sleeping gets up and says, I knew we weren't going to get anywhere in this stolen car. And just then you hear somebody knocking in the trunk saying, are we across the border yet?
Nice.
And so I always thought it was the funniest joke. So the whole plot of my 10-page short story is it starts with that joke, but all written as well as I can make it. And then the rest of it unravels of like his journeys in Mexico, trying to discover the taco time. And I even have a paper, scissors, rock battle.
Oh, nice.
Like everything you can think of. Right. And so I wrote that years ago. I thought it was amazing, but it was obviously garbage. It was just the worst drawn out metaphor after metaphor after metaphor. Cause I was like, that's what makes writing good, right? Every page, 16 metaphors. And all spelled wrong, all caps, and lots of
exclamation points. Yeah,
tons of exclamation points. Turned it into my my college English 111 or something like that. And they were like, "Dog, do not. This is you." I was like, "Do you think I have anything here with this? You think I can maybe I should change majors?" He's like, "I don't think you should change majors."
That's savage.
He's like, nah, just treat this as the elective required for you to get your graphic design degree, homie. You'll be fine. And now with that, let's hear a dramatic reading from the legendary Mike Haspil from Graveyard Shift.
All right. So here we go. And you guys are going to have to deal with me and not the legendary Michael Kramer, who is the one who actually reads the audiobook. And for those of you who don't know, he is the narrator of The Wheel of Time and almost all of Brandon Sanderson stuff. Below Alex, the city was aflame, lit by the fading rays of a rapidly setting sun, which graced his dark skin with a tawny glow. He let his ka slip free of his flesh and into the spirit realm. His true self soared forth, leaving its fleshy confines on the rooftop. He was Menkara, the great bull of Horus once more. The city felt off kilter, punch-drunk, stretched apart. There was always a melody, the song of the world, lurking in the background, giving Menkara the sensation that it was a familiar tune, but one he couldn't quite make out. Tonight, it was riddled with dissonant tones. Beneath him, the city mewled and whimpered in myriad voices. He saw the soft orange-yellow presences of the souls of the living. Seated among them, rare as shooting stars in the night sky, yet more common than they should be, he saw the telltale blue-white presences of lost souls who had not yet crossed. These had no remaining flesh to animate, yet haunted the periphery of the mortal world, confused, aimless, and full of raw, unchecked emotions. Since the reveal, they were multiplying at a steady rate. Because of the vampires.